Another important figure was O.W. Wilson, who was the chief of the Chicago Police Department. He applied then contemporary management principles like bureaucracy, efficiency, chain of command, specialization, much in line with Weber's bureaucratic state, to American policing. He advocated standardization of policing response through rigorous training, initiated regular beat changes to deter corruption, and ended up producing a textbook called Police Administration, which remains on the required readings list for modern policing. Policing in the 60s and beyond. Well, there was turmoil and crisis throughout the 1960s. The decade was seen in light of the Supreme Court decisions that were handed down on a number of decisions designed to control police operations and procedures. Civil unrest led to growing tensions through the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam era. You have to remember that people were out in the streets. People were marching. The social norms of the day were being challenged publicly. When the war ended, this reduced the tensions, and when the civil rights legislation was passed, it reduced the tensions. But the relationship between police and minorities remained extremely rocky, and always has been rocky. The number of violent and property crimes increased dramatically in the 60s and the 70s. Drug addiction and abuse grew. Urban police departments could not control the crime rate, and police officers ultimately resented the demands placed on them by a population that was dissatisfied with the service they were providing. Of course, the federal government ends up supporting in a major way criminal justice, and that support greatly influenced police operations. The Law Enforcement Assistance Administration was formed in the 1970s to provide assistance and research funds for the benefit of local agencies, and the Law Enforcement Education Program enabled officers to pursue degrees in higher education. Many of the criminal justice departments at universities begin at this time. Police unions, which began to grow again in the 60s, continued to have a great impact on departmental administration throughout the 1980s. Unions fought for and won increased salaries and benefits for their members. In many instances, union efforts eroded the power of the police chief, ultimately to make unquestioned policy and personnel decisions. So taking some of the power away from the police chief and placing it in the hands of the unions, which represent the workers. Other problems facing departments included cuts and less funding. You had some problems in police-community relationships, for sure. Rodney King incident in L.A. ultimately leads to an era of reform. The incident that was Rodney King happened in 1999 when Rodney King and his friend Bryant Allen were driving in Los Angeles, California. They refused to stop when signaled by a police car behind them, but instead increased their speed. King, the driver, was apparently drunk or on drugs. When police finally stopped the car, they delivered 56 baton blows and 6 kicks to King in a period of 2 minutes, producing 11 skull fractures, brain damage, and kidney damage. They did not realize that their actions were being videotaped by an observer who later gave the videotape to the media. This in turn inspires a riot when the officers were acquitted for the beating of Rodney King. And of course, it ends up Los Angeles was ablaze, and authorities had lost control of Los Angeles, parts of Los Angeles, due to the Rodney King riots. This ultimately prompts an era of reform. Several police experts decreed that the nation's police forces should be evaluated not on their crime-fighting ability, but on their courteousness, deportment, and helpfulness. Interest was renewed in reviving earlier styles of policing by adding foot patrols and creating more contact with the actual citizens you're serving. Some notable achievements in the 1990s. We see an increased intellectual capacity, use of advanced management techniques, standards of police conduct have improved, more diverse police departments now exist, more intellectually challenging police work, and a gradual police acceptance in reference to the citizens they're serving. Obama established the task force on 21st century policing in 2014. This task force included law enforcement, representatives, academics, and community leaders. And they set themselves upon the task of building trust and legitimacy back into the police force, where the police force acts as a guardian rather than a warrior, and establishes a culture of transparency and accountability. There's policy and oversight. There's technology and social media, which implements new technologies that engage and educate the communities. There's community policing and crime reduction. There's training and education available. And there's also officer wellness and safety. Every officer should have first aid kits and anti-ballistic vests. They ultimately raise the question of whether these recommendations are enough and how effective a task force is at implementing and creating change. This task force was in response to urban unrest in many of our cities. Ultimately, Baltimore was under I want to say they enacted martial law, or at least enacted a curfew in Baltimore. And it was all in relationship to the relationship citizens in Baltimore felt like they were having with their police force, especially citizens of color living in the urban core. Some things to think about, how has law enforcement continued to change since the 1990s? What changes have you seen? Well, we certainly have seen more tanks and more guns and more military-style weapons in police hands than we have certainly in the 1990s. And ask yourself, what role should the police be taking in the 21st century? So, contemporary law enforcement agencies are becoming much more what we would call user-friendly. We're decentralizing police departments, which are making them more responsive to community needs, and we're adapting to new forms of criminal behavior. Even though we're decentralizing, law enforcement is still distributed across local, county, state, and federal jurisdictions. There are some federal law enforcement agencies that are playing a part. They exist inside and outside cabinet level departments. But no agency, whether it's the FBI or the CIA or the NIS or whoever, that has unlimited jurisdiction. And generally speaking, there's no particular order or hierarchy that exists between these agencies. The U.S. Justice Department is the major agency in providing justice in the United States. The arm of the U.S. Justice Department that investigates violations of federal law, seeks to protect Americans from terrorist attacks, gathers crime statistics, runs a comprehensive crime laboratory, and helps train local law enforcement officers. We have the DEA. We have the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. We have the U.S. Marshal Service, the Department of Homeland Security, the federal agency responsible for preventing terrorist attacks within the United States, reducing America's vulnerability to terrorism, and minimizing the damage and assisting in recovery from attacks that do occur. This agency did not exist before 9/11. It was a result, in many respects, of the Patriot Act, and the Department of Homeland Security serves in many respects as an umbrella for all of the other law enforcement organizations in the United States. And then, of course, Customs and Border Protection. You've heard a lot about them with referencing of building Trump's wall. It's the Border Patrol agents and the Customs agents that are denying or allowing immigrants into the country and protecting our borders as they exist now. And then, of course, the Secret Service. They perform two main functions that protect the president and vice president and other national leaders. And they also investigate counterfeiting of American currency and related fraud. Some state law enforcement agencies. State agencies were developed to address rural crime and to assist local agencies who may not have the resources to respond to serious crime. The first was the Texas Rangers, organized in 1835. They also address an increasingly mobile criminal. Many of these agencies were created about the time that transportation resources and motor vehicles became more prevalent, because people were able to just move from place to place in a car in ways that they couldn't before. About half the state agencies are comprehensive, meaning they have most or nearly all of the functions of a typical metropolitan agency. The other half have limited jurisdiction. They carry out a variety of functions, including maintaining training academies and providing emergency medical services. They have some state laboratories and departments, bomb sites. Some are involved in traffic and highway local departments who investigate crime. Today there are 93,000 state police employees, roughly speaking, 61,000 of which are sworn officers. Following 9/11, though, terrorist attacks on many state agencies, particularly in border states, expanded their role and included Homeland Security duties. Many state police agencies maintain programs that are designed to coordinate intelligence information collected at the local level and to pass it on to the Homeland Security function. This is designed to prevent terrorist attacks, to reduce vulnerability to natural disasters, and to prepare and minimize damage through rapid, decisive responses.